While you're analyzing their delayed response for hidden meanings about your relationship status, they're sitting with your unopened message, creating anxiety spirals that would shock you with their intensity and complexity. Their phone isn't a communication device, it's a psychological battlefield where every notification triggers their nervous system's threat response, every message demands emotional labor they're not sure they can provide, and every reply requires navigating landmines of potential misunderstanding, obligation, and vulnerability they desperately want to avoid. The cruel irony is that while they scroll social media for hours, like random posts, and respond immediately to low-stakes communications, your message sits there growing more intimidating with each passing hour. It's not that they don't see it, they see it, read it, reread it, and then enter a psychological state that resembles someone trying to defuse a bomb while blindfolded. The more they care about you, the more dangerous your simple "how was your day" becomes to their emotional equilibrium. Their delayed response isn't about playing games, testing your patience, or indicating lack of interest. It's their trauma-damaged nervous system treating your caring communication like an emotional emergency that requires careful strategizing, perfect word choice, and extensive mental preparation before they can safely engage. What feels like rejection to you is actually their overwhelmed system desperately trying to respond correctly, while protecting themselves from the vulnerability that authentic communication requires. Understanding their response paralysis doesn't mean accepting poor communication as permanent relationship reality, but recognizing the genuine psychological struggle behind their delays helps you stop taking their behavior personally while making informed decisions about whether their trauma responses are something you can compassionately navigate, or whether their limitations make healthy communication impossible regardless of their internal struggles. The most heartbreaking aspect is that their delayed responses often create the very problems they're trying to avoid through careful communication. Their attempts to craft perfect responses backfire into hurt feelings. Their efforts to avoid saying the wrong thing result in saying nothing at all, and their desire to protect the relationship through careful word choice often damages it through prolonged silence that feels like indifference rather than overwhelm. The response anxiety, when every text feels like a test. The avoidance relationship with digital communication is fundamentally shaped by their core trauma belief that every interaction is a potential test of their worthiness, competence, and lovability. When your message arrives, their nervous system doesn't register it as casual communication between people who care about each other. It registers as an examination where their response will be graded, analyzed, and used as evidence of their adequacy as a partner, friend, or human being. Their response anxiety stems from childhood experiences where their words were scrutinized, criticized, or used against them later, teaching their developing brain that communication is dangerous territory, where saying the wrong thing could result in rejection, punishment, or emotional abandonment. This hypervigilance around word choice transforms simple text exchanges into complex strategic operations, where every phrase must be carefully evaluated for potential negative consequences. Watch how they approach your messages with the same energy someone might use to write a legal document or diplomatic correspondence. They read your text multiple times, searching for subtext, hidden meanings, or emotional undertones that might indicate displeasure, neediness, or expectation. They analyze not just what you said, but what you didn't say, how you phrase things, and what your tone might indicate about your emotional state or satisfaction with them. The perfectionism paralysis kicks in as they draft and redraft responses, trying to strike the perfect balance between showing care without appearing too invested, being helpful without seeming overwhelmed by your needs, expressing interest without creating expectations for deeper conversation. Each draft gets scrutinized for potential misinterpretation, emotional weight, or implications they're not ready to handle if you respond with follow-up questions or increased intimacy. Their trauma creates what psychologists call rejection sensitivity, where they're hyper-tuned to detect any possible criticism, disappointment, or negative reaction in your communication. A neutral message gets analyzed for signs that you're upset with them. An enthusiastic message gets examined for pressure or expectations they might not be able to meet. A brief message gets dissected for evidence that you're losing interest or becoming frustrated with their communication patterns. The response anxiety intensifies when your message contains emotional content, relationship discussions, or requests for support because these topics trigger their deepest fears about being inadequate, overwhelming, or disappointing to people they care about. They know they struggle with emotional availability, so communications that require empathy, comfort, or intimate connection feel like tests they're likely to fail rather than opportunities to show care. They often get trapped in analysis paralysis, where the longer they wait to respond, the more perfect their response needs to be to justify the delay. What started as a simple question about dinner plans becomes a high-stakes communication that requires explanation for their delayed response, reassurance about their interest level, and perfect execution to avoid creating additional problems through their procrastination. Their phone becomes associated with performance anxiety rather than connection pleasure. Unlike people who enjoy receiving messages from loved ones, avoidants often feel stressed when they see notifications from people they care about because each message represents potential emotional labor, possible failure, and definite vulnerability they're not sure they can handle successfully. The testing mindset extends to their belief that you're monitoring their response patterns for evidence of their feelings, commitment level, and relationship investment. They imagine you analyzing their response time, emotional tone, and conversation engagement as data points about their care for you. This imagined scrutiny makes every text exchange feel like a relationship evaluation rather than natural communication between people who enjoy each other's company. Their response anxiety often creates the very problems they're trying to avoid. Their delays make you question their interest. Their carefully neutral responses make you feel emotionally disconnected. Their perfectionist paralysis makes them seem disengaged rather than overwhelmed. The irony is that their trauma-based attempts to communicate perfectly often result in communication that feels imperfect, distant, and unsatisfying to the very people they're trying not to disappoint. The most tragic aspect of their response anxiety is how it prevents them from experiencing the joy and connection that healthy communication can provide. Instead of texts being opportunities for closeness, sharing, and emotional intimacy, they become obstacles to navigate, tests to pass, and sources of stress to manage. Their trauma has stolen one of the simplest pleasures of human connection, the ease of talking to someone who cares about you. The emotional labor overwhelm, why responding feels exhausting. The avoidance nervous system treats incoming text messages like emotional emergencies that require massive energy expenditure to process, understand, and respond to appropriately. What feels like simple communication to you registers as complex emotional labor to their trauma-wired brain, which must simultaneously decode your message for hidden meanings, calculate appropriate responses, manage their own triggered feelings, and predict potential outcomes of various reply options before they can safely engage. Their overwhelm begins with the cognitive load of processing not just the literal content of your message, but all the emotional subtext their hypervigilant nervous system believes might be present. They don't just read, "How was your day?" They analyze whether you're checking up on them, testing their availability, seeking emotional connection they might not be able to provide, or expressing subtle dissatisfaction with their recent communication patterns. This emotional detective work is exhausting before they even begin crafting a response. The energy drain intensifies as they mentally rehearse multiple response scenarios, trying to predict how you might react to different approaches, and choosing the option least likely to create additional emotional demands. They consider whether a brief response will hurt your feelings, whether a detailed response will create expectations for ongoing conversation, whether mentioning their struggles will burden you, and whether appearing too positive will seem fake or dismissive of any problems you might be experiencing. Their trauma creates what psychologists call emotional hypervigilance, where they feel responsible for managing not just their own emotional state, but yours as well. Before responding, they must consider your current mood, your recent stress levels, your potential triggers, and how their response might affect your emotional well-being. This caretaking burden makes every text exchange feel like a therapeutic intervention rather than casual communication between equals. The overwhelm compounds when they realize they've delayed responding, because now their message must address both the original content and their delayed response pattern. They need to apologize for the delay without drawing too much attention to it, provide an appropriate response to your original message, and reassure you about their interest level, all while managing their own shame about their communication struggles. What started as one task becomes multiple emotional management projects. Their nervous system's threat detection system remains activated throughout the entire response process, scanning for signs that their communication approach might be creating problems, misunderstandings, or disappointment. This constant monitoring for relationship threats makes responding feel like walking through a minefield where any misstep could damage the connection they're desperately trying to protect through their careful communication approach. The emotional labor extends to managing their own triggered responses to your message content. If you mention stress, they feel obligated to provide comfort they are not sure they can authentically offer. If you share excitement, they feel pressured to match your energy level when they might be emotionally depleted. If you ask questions, they feel required to provide thoughtful answers when thinking itself feels overwhelming. Your emotions become their emotional workload. They often experience what trauma therapists call decision fatigue around response choices, where the mental energy required to evaluate options, predict outcomes, and choose appropriate responses leaves them feeling cognitively exhausted. Simple decisions about emoji usage, punctuation, or casual phrases become complex deliberations that drain their mental resources faster than demanding work projects or important life decisions. The overwhelm is particularly intense when your messages contain multiple topics, questions, or emotional threads that require separate consideration and response. Their trauma-wired brain treats each element as a distinct emotional challenge requiring individual analysis and appropriate reaction. A message mentioning work stress, weekend plans, and relationship feelings becomes 3 separate emotional labor projects rather than one flowing conversation. Their phone becomes associated with emotional depletion rather than connection pleasure. Unlike people who feel energized by hearing from loved ones, avoidants often feel drained by the prospect of engaging in digital communication because their nervous system has learned to treat every message as potential emotional work rather than enjoyable social interaction. The exhaustion creates a vicious cycle where the more drained they feel by communication, the more they delay responding, which increases their anxiety about the delay, which makes responding feel even more overwhelming. They get trapped in procrastination patterns that compound their original overwhelm while creating additional problems they'll need to address in their eventual response. Their emotional labor calculation often includes anticipating your potential disappointment, hurt, or frustration with their response patterns, which adds layers of preemptive damage control to their communication strategy. They're not just responding to your current message, they're trying to prevent future relationship problems through perfect present communication, which transforms casual texting into complex relationship management, requiring enormous emotional energy they often don't have available. The control mechanism, using delays as distance creation. The avoidance delayed responses serve a sophisticated psychological function beyond anxiety and overwhelm. They're unconscious tools for maintaining emotional distance and control over the relationship's intimacy level. Their timing becomes a way to regulate how close they feel to you, how available they appear, and how much emotional space they can preserve while still maintaining connection. This isn't usually conscious manipulation, but rather their nervous system's automatic way of managing the terror of becoming too emotionally accessible or dependent. Their delays function as emotional circuit breakers that prevent intimacy from building too quickly or intensely for their comfort level. When your message creates feelings of warmth, connection, or closeness that trigger their attachment fears, their delayed response automatically creates cooling off time that allows those threatening feelings to dissipate before they have to engage. This unconscious pacing mechanism keeps them from getting overwhelmed by the intensity of caring about you while maintaining the relationship at a manageable emotional temperature. Watch how their response timing correlates with the emotional weight of your messages. Casual, low-stakes communications often receive quicker replies, while personal, intimate, or relationship-focused messages generate longer delays. This isn't coincidental. Their nervous system is using response timing to communicate their comfort level with different types of emotional engagement without having to verbalize their limitations or triggers directly. The control aspect becomes evident in how their delays affect your emotional state and behavior. Whether consciously or unconsciously, they learn that delayed responses make you more grateful for their attention when it arrives, more careful about the frequency and content of your messages, and more accommodating of their communication preferences. Your anxiety about their response time trains you to modify your communication style to match their comfort zone. Their delayed responses serve as automatic boundary enforcement around their availability and emotional energy. By not responding immediately, they're communicating that they're not constantly available for digital interaction, that their attention is finite and valuable, and that you can't assume immediate access to their emotional presence. This boundary setting through timing helps them feel less engulfed by relationship demands while maintaining their sense of autonomy. The power dynamic created by response delays often works in their favor, positioning them as the less available, less needy, and therefore more desirable partner in the relationship. Your eagerness for their response, combined with their apparent ability to delay gratification, creates an imbalance where their attention feels more precious and your attention feels more readily available. This dynamic feeds their need to feel wanted while avoiding the vulnerability of appearing equally invested. Their timing control extends to managing the relationship's pace and direction through strategic responsiveness. Quick responses to certain types of messages encourage more of that communication, while delays discourage topics or frequency levels that feel overwhelming. They're unconsciously training you to communicate in ways that feel safer for their nervous system without having to explicitly negotiate these preferences. The delay pattern often intensifies when they sense you're becoming more attached, invested, or emotionally dependent on their responses. As your need for their communication increases, their response time often decreases proportionally, creating distance precisely when you're seeking more connection. This inverse relationship helps them maintain emotional safety by preventing your attachment from growing faster than their comfort with being needed. Their control mechanism includes using response timing to avoid commitment or future planning discussions that feel threatening to their autonomy. Messages about future plans, relationship progression, or emotional intimacy often receive the longest delays because responding feels like agreeing to increased vulnerability and emotional obligation they're not ready to accept. The delays also serve as testing mechanisms to gauge your tolerance for their communication patterns and emotional limitations. They're unconsciously assessing whether you'll accept their response timing without complaint, modify your communication style to accommodate their patterns, or become frustrated and demand changes they're not prepared to make. Your reaction to their delays provides information about your compatibility with their attachment style. Their timing control can become addictive as they discover the power to influence your emotional state, anxiety level, and behavior through simple response timing adjustments. The ability to create anticipation, relief, frustration, or gratitude through their digital presence or absence can feel intoxicating to someone whose attachment style developed around the need to avoid emotional vulnerability while maintaining interpersonal influence. The most sophisticated aspect of their control mechanism is how they can simultaneously maintain connection and distance through strategic response patterns. They can keep you engaged and interested through eventual responses while preserving their emotional space through delayed timing. This allows them to have relationships without feeling overwhelmed by the constant emotional availability that immediate responsiveness would require. Their delay patterns often become so automatic that they don't consciously recognize them as control mechanisms, instead experiencing them as natural communication preferences or unavoidable anxiety responses. This unconscious nature makes the pattern difficult to address directly because they genuinely don't understand how their timing affects others or serves their psychological needs for emotional regulation and interpersonal control. The avoidance spiral, when delays create more anxiety than responding. The avoidance delayed response pattern creates a psychological trap where the longer they wait to reply, the more overwhelming the task becomes, leading to increased avoidance that compounds their original anxiety exponentially. What begins as momentary hesitation about crafting the perfect response escalates into paralyzing shame, mounting pressure, and the growing impossibility of finding any response adequate enough to justify their extended silence. They become prisoners of their own procrastination, trapped in cycles that make responding feel more terrifying than the original communication anxiety. The spiral begins innocently enough. They see your message, feel the familiar pang of response anxiety, and decide to craft their reply later when they have more mental energy or emotional bandwidth. But later becomes hours, then days, as their avoidance creates mounting pressure around what should have been a simple exchange. The longer they wait, the more significant their response needs to be to justify the delay, transforming casual communication into high-stakes emotional performance. Their shame about delayed responding becomes its own source of paralysis as they realize their communication patterns are probably hurting you, creating relationship problems and revealing their emotional limitations in ways that feel deeply embarrassing. This shame adds another layer of emotional complexity to their response burden. Now they must address not just your original message, but also their delayed response pattern and its impact on your feelings and the relationship dynamic. The anxiety compounds as they imagine your growing frustration, disappointment, or concern about their silence. They picture you analyzing their lack of response for relationship significance, questioning their interest level, or becoming hurt by what appears to be indifference but is actually emotional overwhelm. This anticipated negative reaction makes responding feel even more daunting because they now need to repair damage their delay has created. Their avoidance creates what psychologists call temporal distortion, where the passing time makes their communication task feel increasingly urgent and overwhelming rather than less significant. Instead of your message becoming less important with time, it grows in psychological weight until responding feels like addressing a major relationship crisis rather than casual communication. The delay transforms normal interaction into emergency emotional management. The spiral deepens when they realize that any response now requires explanation, apology, and reassurance about their communication patterns and relationship investment. They can't simply answer your original question. They must also address why they took so long to respond, confirm their continued interest in communication, and manage the meta-conversation about their response timing. One message becomes multiple emotional management tasks. Their procrastination often leads to drafting and deleting multiple responses, as they struggle to find words that address both your original communication and their delayed response pattern adequately. Each draft feels insufficient for the emotional weight their delay has created. They write responses that feel too casual for the significance their silence has generated, then overcorrect with responses that feel too intense for what might have been simple communication. The avoidance spiral includes catastrophic thinking about how their delayed response reveals their fundamental inadequacy as a partner, friend, or communicator. They begin viewing their communication struggles as evidence of their inability to maintain healthy relationships, their selfishness in prioritizing their comfort over others' feelings, or their inherent brokenness that makes normal human connection impossible. The delayed response becomes proof of their unworthiness. Their anxiety about responding often becomes more intense than their original anxiety about the message content itself. The meta-anxiety about their communication patterns overshadows whatever triggered their initial hesitation, creating multi-layered emotional complexity around what should be straightforward human interaction. They're now managing anxiety about anxiety, avoidance about avoidance, and shame about shame. The spiral creates what trauma therapists call learned helplessness around communication, where they begin to believe they're simply bad at digital interaction and should minimize their communication attempts rather than work on improving their response patterns. This self-defeating belief justifies continued avoidance while protecting them from the vulnerability required to address their communication challenges directly. Their delayed response patterns often become self-fulfilling prophecies, where their avoidance creates the very relationship problems they were trying to prevent through careful communication. Their attempts to avoid saying the wrong thing result in saying nothing, which often feels worse to recipients than imperfect but timely communication would have felt. Their perfectionist paralysis creates more relationship damage than authentic, imperfect responsiveness. The avoidance spiral frequently includes them checking their phone repeatedly to see your message, feeling the familiar anxiety spike, and then immediately closing the message without responding while promising themselves they'll deal with it soon. This checking without responding pattern maintains their anxiety at elevated levels while providing no relief through actual engagement or task completion. Their procrastination creates increasing isolation as they begin avoiding not just your messages but all communication that might generate similar response anxiety. They withdraw from multiple relationships simultaneously rather than facing their communication challenges, creating broader social isolation that compounds their original attachment fears and reinforces their belief that relationships are overwhelming and unsustainable. The most tragic aspect of the avoidance spiral is how it prevents them from discovering that most people would prefer imperfect, timely communication over perfect, delayed responses. Their assumption that recipients are judging their communication quality more harshly than their communication timing keeps them trapped in patterns that prioritize their comfort over relationship health, creating exactly the relationship problems their perfectionism was designed to prevent. The inner monologue. What's really going through their mind? The complex psychological drama happening in the avoidance mind while your message sits unanswered would astound you with its intensity, sophistication, and emotional exhaustion. Their internal monologue resembles a committee meeting where different parts of their psyche debate response strategies, analyze potential outcomes, and argue about the safest approach to communication, while their anxiety steadily increases with each passing moment of indecision. The initial response upon seeing your message often includes immediate threat assessment. What does this message mean? Are they upset? Do they need something I can't provide? Is this a test of my interest? Are they trying to increase intimacy beyond my comfort level? Their mind automatically scans for hidden meanings, emotional undertones, and potential traps that might require vulnerability or emotional labor they're not prepared to provide. Their internal critic immediately activates with commentary about their adequacy. I should know what to say. Why is this so hard for me? Normal people don't struggle with simple messages. I'm probably going to say the wrong thing and create problems. Maybe I should wait until I can think of something perfect to say. But then they'll wonder why I'm taking so long. The avoidance voice suggests escape strategies. Maybe I can respond tomorrow when I'm feeling more capable of communication. Maybe I can wait until they message again and then respond to both messages together. Maybe I can pretend I never saw this message and hope they don't bring up my lack of response later. Their attachment anxiety voice adds relationship fears. If I don't respond perfectly, they'll realize I'm not worth the effort. If I keep struggling with communication, they'll find someone easier to be with. If I show my communication anxiety, they'll see how needy and broken I really am underneath my independence act. This entire psychological symphony plays out while they continue checking their phone, rereading your message, and feeling increasingly overwhelmed by what should be simple human connection, creating the very communication problems their elaborate mental preparation was designed to prevent.